Joining us now, Dr. Bradley Thayer. He's a professor of political science at the University of Texas. He's also the author of the book with his co-author, John Friend, How China Sees the World. And he's joining us now because, we got big China news. It's going to be a big meeting in Washington, D.C. The Trump administration saying they've made some progress in finally getting China to the table. We're going to get Dr. Thayer to break it down for us and what the Chinese view is here. Dr. Thayer, it's an honor to have you on, sir.
John, it's great to be with you this morning. Thanks for having me on.
Dr. Thayer, it's my pleasure. Now, look, we've been fighting this battle, those of us that believe China's public enemy number one, for a very long time. You've written a book. I haven't had a chance to read it. I have to buy it. I have to say I have not read your book. I've heard about it, read the excerpts of it, so I like to be honest there. But your new book out with John Friend, How China Sees the World. Give us just a top-line view here, then we can get into the specifics of what is coming, sir.
Sure, I'm happy to. We argue that China is a threat to the United States, and it's a threat for two major reasons. One, because of its capabilities, which have greatly grown. And that's in every respect, John. Its economic power has grown, as we've witnessed. Its diplomatic might has grown. Its military capabilities, conventional and nuclear capabilities, really have grown in the last decades. But the second argument is also intentions, and that China has the intent, due to their hyper-nationalist beliefs, widely shared among the elite, those who are governing China, as well as at the mass level in China. There's the intent that China should be the dominant state in international politics, and it should be able to set the rules and really get what it wants in international politics. So for those two major reasons, China is a major problem for the United States as well as American allies like Japan, Australia, and other states like India in the Asia Pacific, but also internationally. We see Chinese penetration in Europe and in Latin America as well. And the good news really from our side, as we argue in the book, is that this Chinese belief, what we call Han centrism, that is, the ethnic group, the Han in China, are the center of the universe, the center of the world, and everybody should essentially be deferential towards them, is a really bad policy when you're interacting with the rest of the world. It has a great tendency, as you'd expect, to offend a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So that really helps the United States. It allows us really in our public diplomacy and in other avenues to say to the rest of the world, hey, do you really want these guys running the world? Do you know what you're going to get when they're in charge? Mm-hmm. You're going to get the return of a lot of bad ideas to international politics. And it's far better to work with the U.S. and with our allies to maintain the present international order, the structure that we have today, which has been such a great force for peace and stability in international politics since the end of the Cold War. So that's the essence of the book.
Dr. Thayer, give us some examples when you say if the Chinese were to gain the economic and military upper hand in the world, surpass the U.S., you said they would be the purveyor, implementer of some bad ideas. Define bad ideas.
Well, bad ideas that we've seen in the past, of course, in international politics, ideas about hyper-nationalism, that, for example, the Han, the Chinese nation, is the best, and other nations are inferior, and thus should be essentially suppressed or dealt with harshly. We see this in China today in the way that they're treating their Muslim minority, the Uyghur minority, as they're called, in the Muslim province of Xinjiang in western China. The Chinese have really cracked down hard on this, on Muslims there, particularly religious Muslims, seeing them as really a threat and as a major problem. And you've seen the reports about the concentration camps, what the Chinese call re-education camps. Well, that's a really bad idea. Putting people in those types of obviously concentration camps is something we've seen in the past, and it turns out really badly. Second big thing is when the Chinese deal with Africans, they often see Africans as inferior, and their latent racism often comes out when they're dealing with them. We have a great quote from a Zambian political figure who says that we've had in Zambia, in Africa, bad people before. The whites were bad, the Indians were worse, but the Chinese are worst of all because of their business practices and because of their attitudes towards the local population. Well, that really offends a lot of people, and that kind of captures the idea that the Chinese are in it for China, and they're not there to help anyone else. The infrastructure or the investment that they're providing ultimately is there to benefit China and China's interests. We also see the expansion of Chinese power in the South China Sea, as you've seen, and in the East China Sea with the border with India, and in other places too. The Chinese are really expansionistic in a territorial sense. In a way, of course, which they haven't been for decades. And that's really alarming when they start to push up against U.S. allies like Japan or other states like India or Vietnam. So all of these are really warning signs of how the Chinese act and the values and the norms that they're essentially going to develop and in time, if in fact they're successful, impose on the rest of the world. So we're arguing that, of course, China's rise brings with it a lot of bad ideas. And there's a lot of people need to reflect in the United States, in Europe, and worldwide about what you're really going to get when China's dominant. And the fact of the matter is you're going to get a lot of bad ideas, of the return to the past, and the possibility of conflict with its rise as well.
You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network, Trucking the Truth Across America, and we're with Dr. Bradley Thayer. He's the author of the book, How China Sees the World. He's also a professor of political science at the University of Texas. Dr. Thayer, I got a couple more minutes. I want to talk about this big meeting coming up, the Trump administration announcing yesterday that there is going to be this huge bilateral meeting with the Chinese and the Trump administration. It's going to be held in the Eisenhower building over a series of days, trying to hammer out better trade deal than we've had. Obviously, the president not been shy about putting all kinds of tariffs on the Chinese, and their economy is tanking as a result of it. What do you look for in this meeting? And don't the Chinese now have a lot of pressure on them to deal with this president because their economic situation has worsened due to the tariffs?
Absolutely. I think there are a couple of points there. I think what we are going to get out of, what the Trump administration is going to get out of it, will probably be some very important agricultural deals and perhaps some aspects of manufacturing as well. So I expect those elements to come out of it. But the Trump administration, to its great credit, has really recognized that China is a threat to the United States and to our allies. And as you've seen, of course, in their time in office, they've taken a lot of measures to begin to put pressure on China and to try to kind of change the policy of benign neglect that we had over the last 10, 15 years in our policy towards China, and to recognize that, well, dealing with China is going to require some military measures. It's going to require economic measures like trade, like restrictions on trade, like ensuring that the Chinese do not lay the 5G grid, right, that they essentially do not provide the infrastructure of 5G networks.
Right.
And in diplomacy as well, we've had the Trump administration call China out. So to its great credit, the Trump administration has recognized that, well, China is a competitor of the United States. It is a threat to the United States, and the U.S. has to take measures against it.
Right.
At the same time, we can still trade, right? We can still engage in areas of essentially mutual interest, like in agricultural trade in another area.
Right.
But the Trump administration has told the Chinese, in essence, your free ride is over.
Right, exactly.
The U.S. is watching you now.
Well, I really commend the president because we've talked about this, and those of us that believe China is an existential threat to the United States in a lot of different ways, and especially screwing us on trade and jobs, going over there. I think what the Trump administration has done is historic. Of course, he gets no credit for that. But look, he's brought the Chinese to Washington to the table because his tariffs have been highly successful because we've been getting screwed by them for, I don't know, decades. Finally, now the reality of them is setting in. And, you know, they had a meeting with Steve Mnuchin, I don't know, it was like, I don't know, a year and a half ago. And Mnuchin came on, he said, oh, yeah, we got a deal going. There'll be no tariffs. Everything is fine. And we find out there is no deal. They made no. But this is what the Chinese do, right? They promise you something. They never deliver it. They never do anything. And it's just talk. And now with these tariffs and the threat of another $200 billion in tariffs that the president said he was going to put on them is what's brought them to the table. All right, Doctor, I'm out of time. Dr. Bradley Thayer, thanks for being with us, professor of political science at the University of Texas.
Great,
Thank you
great
for being with us.
You.